Hey, hello. This is Dennis Pethers here. It's good to see you. Hopefully, some people are going to join. Please, I always say, if you do join, say hello to me so I know that you're there, because it's kind of interesting talking to yourself. So let me know. Just put it on. Just say hi, say hello. Let me know. Obviously, I'll know your name if I know you. If I don't know your name, don't recognise it, I might say, where are you from? So put that as well if you want, so I know where you're from. Going to just spend a minute or two catching up on a couple of things before we get into the book. Just so you know, if there's any new people joining, this is in a sense, a more for me session than anybody else, because I'm writing this book called Discipleship. As you can see, look at that. Dave Lodge, who's in the background, you don't see him, but he's the guy that makes this all look so slick and well prepared, because it is well prepared. So Dave's doing that in the background. But yeah, so this is a book I'm writing called Discipleship, and it's all about what the title says. It's not a spelling mistake. It's really trying to underline the fact that we have to do discipleship. It's not just believing certain things and that's it, but it's putting them into practice. And there's a mission that Jesus came to achieve, to seek to save what was lost, to reconcile people to God, all those things that he literally gave his life for. And he asks us to join us in that mission, to be part of that mission. And to do that, we become his followers, his disciples. And so we have to do it. And something I've said a number of times already in this book is that if we're going to be people that say yes to Jesus, then we're people that say yes to Jesus' mission. So we took a couple of weeks off because I've been pretty crazy busy traveling all over the place. And I'll travel again in a few days' time. So next week we may have to reschedule just because I'm traveling so much. But it's a great help to me to be sharing what's happening in this book with you, because one of the great things about having to come on this broadcast and share it with those of you that are coming with me on the journey is it means I have to do some work on it. Otherwise, with all the other stuff I have to do, it will be very easy just to put it on one side and never get around to doing it. So thank you so much for turning up each time we do this, to keep me focused on making sure that I make the progress excuse me, that I need to make. So where are we in the book? Where have we got to? Well, we've actually had 9 sessions so far, which have taken a bit more than 9 weeks, as I said, because things have been busy. And also, I should tell you, those of you that don't know on this call, there's just a few of you on at the moment, maybe you all know this, but since we last had this broadcast, I've become a granddad again. My daughter Amy and her husband Max had a beautiful little baby girl called Ruby, and she's now 9 days old. 10 days old. So it's almost her second birthday. We celebrate birthdays every week for the first few months when a baby's born. So that's another reason I've been pretty crazy busy as well. But back to the book, where we're up to in it, we've been looking at discipleship. How do we join Jesus in his mission? And we've had 3 different sections where we're looking at the cost of discipleship and what does that all mean, and the process of discipleship. And where we're getting to now is I want to think about a community of discipleship. What does community mean in terms of discipleship? And where I want to start in this chapter 10, I want to think about a missional community. Now, I want to say this up front as well, because things have been so crazy busy. I almost postponed today because I thought, am I really ready for this one? And the answer is I'm not quite ready for it, but I'm with friends. So that's a good thing. It means I can share with you where I'm up to at the moment. And then you can actually, as you so often do, feedback some helpful comments and thoughts about what I've said, which will help me to make changes where I want to make them. And also, to be honest with you, just doing this and speaking about the book out loud is a great help for me to get it into my head as to how I really want to say it and the kind of things that I want to say. So in this chapter 10 is the beginning of the last section. There are 4 sections. I said this is the 4th section, and this is all about community. Discipleship is community. And this first chapter in this section, chapter 10, is all about a missional community. So what I'm saying here is that if we're going to really be people that join Jesus' mission, this isn't something that God expects us to be doing on our own as individuals. The church should be a missional community. Thank you, Sharon, for your congratulations, by the way, and thank you to others that have said hello and good morning. Nice to see you. And any of you that are joining, please say hello So I know you're there. I want to start this chapter with a couple of very I find them very powerful stories that I may use at other places in the book. So this one I'm going to start with. If I use it earlier, I'll refer back to it here. But if I don't use it earlier, I'll tell it in full here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually tell it in full now, because then I've got it recorded. One of the other great things about doing this book is that Dave Lodge, in the background there, is recording all of this, and then it becomes a transcript, so I can write the book by saying it, not just writing it. I am doing both, but it just means that I've got that as well. So if I say it aloud, this story, it means it's written for me, so I haven't got to write it all again. But let me start with this story that I want to tell, because I think it sets in motion perfectly what I mean when I talk about the church. If we're going to join Jesus in his mission, the word church should describe a missional community of people, and that mission is joining Jesus in his mission. So here's the story I want to start with. A couple of years ago now, I think it was, Dave Lodge, he's on the call as well, and I were in Mombasa, Kenya, and we've been leading a rooftop encounter with about a couple of hundred leaders from different parts of Kenya. And we've been sharing the vision of the rooftop and what we do. And after it, Dave and I had lunch with some people, and one of whom was a pastor. And I asked him to tell me what was Mombasa like. I said, tell me about Mombasa. And he said to me, Mombasa is 50% Christian and it's 50% Muslim, but it's not going to stay that way. And I said, what do you mean? I hoped he was going to say that there'd be a great move of God and everybody in Mombasa would become Christian, but he didn't say that. He said, no. He said, the Muslims, they're doing very strategic things in the city. The first thing he said was that what the Muslims are doing is they're buying all of the best buildings in the city, and then they're, in his words, Islamizing them. They're actually making them look like Muslim buildings. They're changing the fascias and all the way they look, and they're putting the different Muslim appearances and crests and all these things on the building. So as you walk through the city, what you see is lots and lots of very big buildings that are Muslim. They're Islamized buildings. So the sense you get is that you're in a Muslim place. The second thing they're doing, which is probably even more strategically important than that, is they are ensuring that Muslims get places of influence in the city, in business, in politics, health, education, all the spheres of society, if you like. In all of those places, they are intentionally ensuring that Muslims are put into those places, and then they're helped to know how to influence those spheres that they're in, so that the way the city thinks is Muslim. The third thing he said they were doing is they were paying pastors of churches to stop being Christians and become Muslims, which I find amazing. He said that they did that because so many of the Christian pastors are poor and have no money and food. The Muslims say they'll give them money, provide a home for them, provide food. So they're asking them to join the Islamic faith rather than be Christians. Real powerful challenges for people. When he said, after he said that, I said to him, what's the church doing? And he said, we meet together on Sundays and ask Jesus to send more people to church. And now I'm pleased to say I've had other conversations with different people in Kenya since then. And I've discovered what he said. There are some bright lights of hope in this. It's not quite as bad as he cast it. But the point of sharing that story at the beginning of this chapter is that the way he talked about the Muslim community was as a missional community. Dave and I also met this young man called Ahmed. Straight after that, we went for a walk down to the river, which flows into Mombasa from the ocean. And walking back from it, Dave and I met this. Well, Dave was talking to one guy and I was talking to another. We just found ourselves chatting with these young guys walking along the street. And I was talking to this young guy called Ahmed, who was a Muslim. And he told me very openly that he believed that Mombasa was going to become a Muslim city. I asked him which mosque he went to, and he gave me a strange look and said, I just go to all of them. We're just Muslim. And I reflected on how that relates so often to church in a city. So many different churches, often quite divided and quite fractured, not with one sense of being on mission together. And I guess I start this chapter with that story to say, if we are going to join Jesus' mission and equip Christians to be disciples who make disciples who make disciples, which is what the whole purpose of this book is all about, then we've got to learn how to be missional communities. And to do that, I think what we need to do is to think about, how do we deploy and equip Christian people to be able to actually impact not just the church community where they are on Sunday or other times of the week as well, but how do we equip them? What kind of ways can we help them to really make an impact in the daily lives that they live? Now, in previous chapters, we talked a little bit about that. But in this one, I really want to think about the focus. I want to focus on a few things, but primarily on how can we use spaces or places or whatever to really ensure that when people gather together, they are not just gathering together for the sake of gathering together. They're gathering together in order that they can be equipped to bring the gospel into the communities where they are, to make disciples who make disciples. And I think the whole thing about space I find interesting. As I said when I began, I'm still working on this chapter a little bit, so I'm going to ask you to be a bit patient with me as I go through this next part, because I think I'm still working it out in my head a little bit. So any thoughts you have, please write them down. But something else I just want to say is when I first became a Christian, and that was on a train. I wasn't in a church building at all. I was on a train reading a book, Mere Christianity. I became a Christian sitting on a train. I met Jesus sitting on a train, and he came and lived in my life when I was on a train. All that happened in this railway carriage, or this train carriage, sorry, just outside of London Liverpool Street Station. So in my becoming a Christian, it never occurred to me to think that Jesus is somehow in one place where you have to go to worship or to meet him. He's not in a place. He's actually everywhere. And I think I just say that because when I first went to the church, where I began to go after I became a Christian, and kept hearing these people saying week after week, "Thank you, Lord, we can come into your presence." They often would say thy presence as opposed to your presence, but it doesn't matter. I guess it means the same thing. I kept wondering, what do we mean by coming into your presence? Surely we're in his presence all the time. Surely we're always with him and he's always with us. And as I've reflected on it over decades now, I think what I glean from that is that part of the challenge of being missional community as church is that we've made the space we call church into a place that is a building, and that's where most of our focus is. So unlike the Muslims in Mombasa, and by the way, it's not just in Mombasa, that spreads across much of Central Africa. If you draw a line across the middle of Africa and go north and south, you'll see north of it there are Muslims constantly pushing down. It's also happening in Europe as well, by the way, and other parts of the world. And it's not just Muslims. There are many other worldviews and ideologies that are absolutely intent on strategically recruiting people to be part of their movement. And they don't do it by sitting in buildings and asking people to come along. They do it by being out among and equipping people to know how to communicate the message persuasively and powerfully so that people will want to join in with what it is that they believe. And I think that's why I just mentioned that story, because I think, and I'd appreciate any comments you have on this, those of you that are listening, I think a big challenge of us being a missional community is that in many ways, the community that we build as church, at the heart of it, is not really missional. It's more about the church. It's about us. It's about what we do. It's about the times that we spend together. It's about our worship services, our Bible studies, whatever. There's a whole bunch of things that we do. But the focus is not really on the mission field. Any comments on that, please? I'd be really grateful for. As I keep saying, as I go through this book, I'm not seeking to be critical or unhelpful or anything. I'm just seeking to look at what I see and reflect on it and try to help others to think about it and reflect upon it as well. So if we're going to be a missional community, then I think I'm going to just give 3 P's that I think are really important, that typify a missional community. And I'm going to focus on one of these today and think about what spaces we need for this to happen. The 3 P's are, I think, if we're going to be a missional community, we'll be a community of purpose, of passion, and of power. Purpose. What's purpose? Well, purpose is the reason why we exist. Why do we exist? It's a very fundamental question, but I think it's a really important one. Why do we exist? Passion, the desire to achieve what it is that we exist to do, and power, the ability to do what is required to achieve our purpose. Let me just run through those again. So purpose, the reason why we exist. Passion, the desire to achieve what it is that we exist to do. Power, the ability to do what is required to achieve our purpose. So reason, desire, and ability. Those things I think are really important when we think about having being a missional church. We need to know what we exist for. We need to have the desire to do what we exist for, and we also need to have the ability to do it as well. There's no point just thinking it or saying it's what we're about. We have to have those things in place. And I want to focus, as I say, in this chapter, the missional community chapter, I want to focus primarily on really the purpose, and think about what does it mean for us to be providing ways of people who are Christians discovering what it means to be on mission with Jesus and joining him in his mission. And there's a couple of things. One of those is people, and I want to focus on that more in the next chapter. But what I want to focus on primarily in this chapter is places. Where are the places? In what ways, I guess, let me put it simply, in what ways should we be gathering so that we can help Christians to be effective when they're scattered? And I think that is such a key thing, because Christians spend a lot of time and money on providing spaces to meet. I find everywhere I go around the world, all I ever come across is churches raising money for buildings and extensions and everything else. It's constant. Millions and millions of pounds or dollars or whatever currency being spent, raised all the time for these things. But what kind of spaces do we need if we're going to really equip the church to be effective in joining Jesus' mission? A couple of things I want to say about that. This is a little bit clumsy, but forgive me. But here we go. And I just want to ask some questions here. What is the purpose of Christians gathering? Why do Christians meet? I've got 4 possible answers to that, which I want to just suggest. I'll put this in the book and give people a chance to reflect on it. So why do Christians gather? Is it, number 1, to participate in an act of worship? Is it, number 2, to provide a safe place where the truths of Christianity can be celebrated without opposition? I hope you understand what I mean by that question. Let me read it again. Is it to provide a safe place where the truths of Christianity can be celebrated without opposition? Is it, number 3, to ensure the maintenance of a religious building? If we keep coming, as the congregation keeps coming, then we can keep the place open. I find a lot in America when I go there, lots of pastors say, we just need to keep the lights on for as long as we can. Keep this place alive. Keep the church alive. And when they say church, what they typically mean is the place, not the people, but the place. Or is it, number 4, to inspire, envision and equip Christians to join Jesus in his mission? Is that why we gather? Is it an act of worship? Is it a safe place where we can just celebrate truth of the gospel without opposition? Is it to keep a building going? Or is it to inspire, envision and equip Christians to join Jesus in his mission? If you want to answer that question, please do on chat. Just give me your thoughts on that. I'd appreciate what you think. So please take the time, if you're listening, to just write down what you think. Which of those 4 is it? Which of them most closely represents the church in your community? And my suggestion is that the answer is likely to be a blend to some degree of all 4. But I think the practical reality is that more often than not, the purpose for which the church meets is more closely associated with 1 to 3 than it is number 4. So primarily, the purpose of meeting is an act of worship. It is to provide a space where we can come and celebrate what we believe without being criticized. And it is to ensure that this place that we call church can carry on. What I think is often sadly lacking, which is why I think we need to refocus everything in church, I'll come to that in a minute, is that what seldom happens is we don't inspire, envision, and equip Christians to join Jesus in his mission. So let me look at why, something which I think is really important about why that is. I think this is at the heart of it, and I hope when I write the book it will be a bit clearer than I'm making it just at the moment. I think there's a real challenge for many, many churches when we think about what kind of community church is. Because I'm suggesting in this chapter that the church needs to be a missional community. That means it exists for the sake of people outside, fulfilling the mission of Jesus. The purpose of church is to be missional. That's its reason. That's its raison d'etre, as the French say. But I think more often than not, the church is more of a membership community than a missional community. It's more based upon people belonging to this entity called church, a church member. And what happens there is, when we think about that, is that therefore, in a sense, the whole purpose can so easily change. Because the purpose of a missional community is to actually reach the people who are not yet in that community. It's to be looking constantly. Like I mentioned in the story of the Muslims in Mombasa. Their purpose is to be changing the city so that people will want to find out who Muhammad is and how they can become Muslim. But the problem with membership community is that it actually exists for the sake of those who belong. That's its purpose. Because a membership community is for the members. I find it interesting when we think about the word member and what does that mean. I remember years ago hearing a good friend of mine speaking on this in a conference, and he put it very well. He said that the word member, because the Bible doesn't talk about church members, but the idea of church membership was quite a late idea, and it began at the time when many other societies were being formed, and they all wanted members to become part of their different movement, group, whatever. Here was the thing that he said, that when membership was first introduced into church, the word member described an active participant in the objective of the movement. So if you become a member of a society, maybe it was a society to stop alcoholism or drug addiction, or it was to stop prostitution or whatever, all kinds of different things for the good of mankind in some way. That's what many of these societies were formed for. By becoming a member of it, you said, I'm in, count me in, I'm going to do something to make a difference. And the church was no different. People became members of churches in order that they could participate in the mission of the church being completed in some way. But increasingly, the word member in society has had quite a different meaning. It doesn't really describe that often. Member now talks less about participation in the objective of the mission and talks more about entitlement. If you're a member of something, then it typically means that you have expectation of that thing that you're part of to provide you with what it is that you want by being a member of it. And I think, as my friend told that story, he tried to say this is the challenge, that more often than not now, the church membership that people have is far less about them participating in the mission and far more about them benefiting from membership of the church that they're a part of. So church membership, as I say, if membership is the basis of our community, then ultimately the primary purpose of the community is to take care of and give to the members those things that they want by being part of the community. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, tell me. And if it does, tell me as well, would you? Because I really would like to hear your responses on this as you're listening to this. Because remember, what this book is about is discipleship, equipping Christians to become disciples who make disciples. But if the purpose of the church is to serve the membership rather than be on mission to reach those outside, then there's no disciples being made to make disciples. What we're doing is we're making all of what happens something that takes place inside of the church. So all of the roles and responsibilities and jobs that people have are primarily to run church, the programs, the events that we do, and everybody finds himself serving the church by in some way fulfilling those roles and not fulfilling roles about reaching the people who are not yet in church. I'm going to just read something to you, and I'm very cautious about reading this because this is a real email that I saw once, and it's I'm going to read two versions of the email. One is the real one, and one is not real. There's a real one, and there's a copy, a make-believe one. But I think I'm reading these not to be critical in any sense of the church. I'm not going to mention any names or churches, by the way. Not to be critical of the church that sent it, but just because I think it highlights something really important about what we're thinking about in terms of what is our real priority. So here's the email. It says this message is high priority. And it says, dear church members, needed volunteer or volunteers to oversee the maintenance and upkeep of the church buildings. As you will be aware, it continues at the end of December. After many years of faithful service, Mr. X will be stepping down from his role in looking after our church buildings, and the two manses is a British word, parsonages some people use, or vicarages other people use, whichever one you want. Mr. X has been a stalwart, and we cannot thank him enough for all he has done. But while we're going to miss him, it will be much more than he or we anticipated. The reason is that so far, no one person or group of people have offered to take on the role. If you feel called to serve the church in this way, no experience is necessary, and Mr. X is more than happy to spend some time to explain what the role entails. As indicated, we aren't looking necessarily for one person to do everything. Indeed, if several people volunteered, we'd be able to share the jobs out between everyone. The role is not a formal leadership position within the church, but a voluntary one. It involves keeping an eye on the church buildings, which are subject to ongoing wear and tear, organising someone to fix things when they break or need mending, liaising with companies that undertake regular statutory checks on the building, fire alarm, health and safety, and with the estate agent or realtor, as some countries say, who rents one of the manses for us, and keeping the leadership team updated. If you feel called to take on this role, or even just a part of this role, please let Mr. Y or myself know. We'd be happy to explain more about what the role envisages and to consider any offer of help, no matter how big or small a commitment you're able to offer. Yours in here, Mr. Z, or Mr. Z, as some would say, the church secretary. Then here's another version. So was that the real one, or was it this one? Version 2. Dear church members, needed volunteer or volunteers to join Jesus in his mission to ensure that all the people in the city hear the good news about Jesus. As you'll be aware, at the end of December, after many years of faithful service, Mr. X will be stepping down from his role in overseeing our disciple-making strategy among people outside the walls of the church. Mr. X has been a stalwart, and we cannot thank him enough for all he has done. While we're going to miss him, it will be much more than he or we anticipated. The reason is that so far, no one person or group of people have offered to take on the role. If you feel called to serve the Lord in this way, no experience is necessary, and Mr. X is more than happy to spend some time to explain what the role entails. As indicated, we aren't looking necessarily for one person to do everything. Indeed, if several people volunteered, we'd be able to equip more disciples to join Jesus in his mission and reach more people in the city with the good news of Jesus. The role isn't a formal leadership position, but a critical one. It involves engaging with and making disciples of people outside the walls of the church, equipping other Christians to become and make disciples, ensuring that the church, when gathered, is keenly aware of all that is happening as together we join Jesus in his mission to seek and to save the lost. If you feel called to take on this role or even part of this role, please let Mr. Y or myself know. We'd also be happy to explain more about what the role envisages, and to consider any offer of help, no matter how big or small a commitment you're able to offer. Yours in him, Mr. Z or Mr. Z, Church Secretary. So which of those is the real one is the question. And everything within me wishes it was the second one, about a disciple making strategist. But I regret to say I have never seen a communication in a church about that. It was the first one. And I think what saddens me about that is, in many ways, it shows what are the real priorities of the church. Let me qualify that, because I don't want to come across as critical here. Let me make a few comments. Firstly, let me say this. I completely understand why such a communication is marked as high priority, because it's seeking an urgent solution to an emergency situation. So I get that. I don't think it's a bad email, because the reality is, and this is just the stark reality, when a local church owns buildings, they have to be cared for, and it requires a lot of work and attention. And there's often an immediacy and urgency, and they're also very expensive, so they have to be cared for. And so, not surprisingly, these things become a priority. And the members, as the email made it perfectly clear, understandably, the members are asked, do they feel called to serve the church by answering this urgent need? Secondly, I observe that because it's such a high priority, whoever volunteers won't be left to find out for themselves how to do the job. Mr. X is very happy to spend time with them to ensure that they know what the job entails. They'll be equipped to do what's needed. They won't be left on their own, just hoping that they can work it out for themselves. They'll be shown how to do it. Thirdly, and I'm being careful here because I could be misunderstood, but for me, I think there's something really deep in there, just a few words. Thirdly, perhaps this part of the email reveals something really important about how certain things become a priority over others. It says, if you feel called to serve the church in this way, my challenge personally, without trying to be critical, but just being honest, my challenge with that statement is that Jesus never asked anybody to serve the church. He asked us all to serve him. And the church is not an entity that needs to be served. The church exists for the sake of Jesus, and it's Jesus we should be serving. And I just think there's something really important there, which I'll probably spend a bit more time on in the book. I also struggle to find personally to understand how serving the church by looking after the buildings is a calling. I have to be honest with you, but we could debate that forever. So here's the thing. By no fault of their own, what happens is many things become a priority to a church with their members, because the things that are put in place for the church to exist, for the members to be able to participate in church, have inbuilt in them this kind of challenge, that the minute you have buildings and the minute you have properties and the minute you have all these different things, these so quickly become an immediate, urgent priority. And that's nobody's fault. No one did it for that reason. We did it because it was a natural response. But what can easily happen is that making disciples is not a priority, because in so many ways the church can carry on as usual without making disciples. There's no visual imperative. If the roof falls down in a church, you have to fix it because you can see it's broken. If there's a leak in the pipe or something, you have to get it done because it's there before you. But millions of people who are going to spend an eternity without God, they're often not in our thinking. And so we can very easily not focus on that and make that a priority because it's just not so visible. I was in Phoenix, Arizona a while ago, and I was talking to a deacon of a church. And it's a conversation I've had with so many people, leaders all over the world. He began by telling me how excited he was that I was going to be speaking, because he thought the church needed to hear what I had to say. because in his words, the church needs help. He then began to outline what the help looked like and began to list a number of roles within the life of the church, as he called it, that need to be filled. There was a need for more deacons, more teachers in Sunday school, more volunteers to work with the youth and children. And he went on and on, all these people that they needed. And he wanted more people coming to the church. I hope, in part, because he wanted people to spend eternity with God. But clearly his priority, his objective, his purpose for wanting more people to come to church was because they've got a whole lot of jobs they need to get filled. And if we can have more people coming, more young people coming, then we can get the jobs filled, and the church can function in a way that makes the members feel this is a good church to be part of. Am I being too critical? I'm not trying to be. I'm just trying to be honest about what I observe. That email that I read, and then I read my adapted version, I wonder if perhaps it might be better if the adapted version actually started like this, something like this. And again, this doesn't relate to any particular church now. This is just a mythical email. What about if it said urgent communication? We're a local church of 500 people, and we've baptized 10 people in the last 2 years. Praise God. But all of these are people that are connected with the church through family. While we praise God for that, in our city there are 250,000 people, and a very optimistic view would be that some 10,000 of these people are in some way being reached by the combined efforts of all the different expressions of Jesus' church in the city. This means there are 240,000 people in the city who are utterly lost, and if what we believe is true, are facing a lost eternity. Friends, this is why I've marked this communication high priority. See, a membership community will focus on the 10,000 that are in the church. A missional community will focus on the 240,000 people that are not. And that's why I think we need to think seriously about being missional community. I want to talk about as we think about how do we stop, how do we prevent going from missional to becoming a membership focused community. And I want to suggest 3 I's, not these I's, but 3 I's, 3 words beginning with I, that I think can really help us to face this. And I think I will suggest that churches really do look at this and think about it. The first I is this: there is an inevitable path of just natural processes that take place in any organization or movement. So let me just outline what they are very quickly. A church or a group of churches, well, let's just focus on one church because it's easier. A local church, can begin with great intentions. A church begins, people become part of it, they're on mission, they're reaching out, they're sharing their story with their friends and neighbors and whatever, and the church begins to grow because people come to faith in Christ. So it begins with great intentions. And people get equipped to share their faith. As people come to faith, there are now more people. So this community, missional community at the beginning, grows rapidly. As the number grows, there's a need to introduce some structure. They need people to start running things, to run groups and events and things like that. There's also a place for them they also want a place to meet together. This is all natural. No one's bad. No one's planning anything revolutionary here. This is just the natural order of things. And as the structure grows, groups are formed, and these groups naturally become important to those that belong to them. And so they become focused on themselves. And also, in different ways, the community now invests in buildings that provide space for them to meet. After time, what happens is that the jobs for people in the church are largely now given to the professionals. And also, the cost of buildings and staff costs and everything else become the primary focus of what the church's resources are used for. So most of the church's funding has to be, it's not, no one's doing this to be bad. It's just the natural order of things that most of the church's resources are spent on looking after the place where they meet and the people that run the programs in the places where they meet. And so that's the membership. It happens without anybody deviously in any sinister way planning it. It's just the natural way things happen. And I would suggest that for many churches, that's the natural process they've gone through. So the second I is the intentional pursuit of God's purpose. So rather than just letting the natural happen, to actually intentionally put things in place to ensure that we keep coming back to what our purpose is. In Amos chapter 5, God says, seek me and live, seek me and live. And the whole challenge there was people going through the processes and all the different things they did, but they'd forgotten that the whole purpose of this wasn't the things in themselves, it was actually God. And so this intentional really looking at God's purpose, reminding ourselves, what is God's purpose? Why are we here? I think is a critical thing that very few churches do, but I would suggest every church should regularly be doing. Because the natural processes that are inevitable don't require any training, anything. They just happen. But to avoid them, we have to be willing to put things in place that take us outside of the natural processes. So let me just look at a couple of things here. The community must be constantly reminded that it does not exist for its own sake, but for the sake of the mission of Jesus. That's a constant thing we have to keep on doing. I find myself, as I travel many parts of the world, that's what I often do when I go to speak in a church. I do that. And so many churches say, well, I haven't heard a message like that for years. I hear that over and over again. Oh, I haven't heard that message for so long, I'd almost forgotten it, because the church becomes so focused on itself. The community should intentionally stay connected. The church community, should intentionally stay connected with the community outside. Not hiding behind walls, or as we so often do. We need to stay connected with people. But what so often happens is we build this membership community that we draw the members in, and all of their friends and connections become other members within that group. And so they become disconnected. And so therefore, these people who are lost are not a visible reality for them. So they don't become, they're not a priority. And also the community, the church community, needs to be equipped and supported to make an impact on the community. They have to be equipped and supported in the doing. I'm going to look at that more in chapter 11. The third I, which I think is really important, critical, is that the intentionality will only continue as a result of, and here's the third I, the intervention of a supernatural God. We need to remember that it's not our church. Oh my goodness, the times I hear people say our church, my church, this church, it isn't ours. It's his. I lead a ministry called The Rooftop. And as part of The Rooftop, based on Acts chapter 10, where Peter went to the rooftop, we take Christians to rooftops to look out across their community and ask a question. God, what do you see when you look at this community? And how can we join you in your mission? Join you with what you're doing to reach this community? And it's often revolutionary. The times I've heard Christian people say over and over again on rooftops all over the world, this is the first time they've ever looked at their community and asked these questions, because they are a membership community focused on the church and the members, rather than a missional community focused on the people outside. And so I guess what I'm trying to say in this chapter is that this in a sense combat, almost this kind of conflict, if that's the better word, between being a missional community or a membership community. I think at heart, many Christian people feel that missional community is what they really want to be. But the reality is that the context in which we be and do church is so membership focused that we find ourselves very quickly making all of our priorities the things that happen in the church. And so we become disconnected with the people outside. Please, please, please. Hey, Joy. nice to see you from Bangladesh, just joined us. If any of you have a comment on what I'm saying, please let me know. I really want to hear what you're saying, because I know just how sensitive these issues are that I'm talking about. And I'm not trying to be destructive. I'm trying to be constructive. So if that's the case, if it's a reality, which I believe it is, that this community of believers in a city, there are many churches in a city, but let's just think about one for now. One church should describe everybody anyway, but let's think about one local one, because that's an easier way to do it. It's inevitable, I think, that for that community to exist, there's some ways, some places that we have to provide for people to connect, to be together, to gather, I guess. But I want to suggest that we need a radical rethink of what that would look like. So let me just spend a few minutes focusing on that before we finish. A few years ago, I was in Japan, and I had this opportunity to visit a vast office complex that had been designed by a leading architect in Japan. It was this huge. The cities in Japan are so vast; they just seem to go on forever. And we went to visit this place, and we were shown around it. We sat in a little room first of all, and I thought, "Is this it? Is this all we're going to see?" And then they opened the door, and suddenly there was this huge space with people, hundreds of people in it, all over the place. And we were shown around it. And as we were shown around this vast complex, I was told repeatedly by our guide that this workspace that had been created, and this is so important to where I want to go for a few minutes next, this workspace that had been created, where there were desks and computers and bathrooms and coffee machines and quiet spaces and all sorts of things, all together mixed up in this huge space. Their point was everything in this building had been placed in such a way, so meticulously, that, listen to this part, every person who used it would be able to effectively achieve their mission objective. In other words, the building they built, the space they built, was intentionally designed to ensure that all those people that were part of that community were able to achieve their mission objective. So what, if we thought about that for a moment, what kind of buildings, what kind of places, spaces could we provide for Christians if we're missional? If our purpose is not just to provide a place for members to come, because that's the kind of place they like to come to, but what about if we were actually creating spaces or providing spaces where people could gather in such ways that they could be in mission with Jesus? What would it look like? So what would it look like if we did that as a local church? What kind of places would we build? And would it not be better, perhaps, because we spend billions of dollars or pounds or whatever on creating spaces at the moment for church that is focused primarily on a place that people come to learn in a passive way and be disconnected from the mission field where the people who need to know Jesus are. We take people out from that. We spend a fortune on providing places that disconnect people from the reality of what it means to be outside of the church. I didn't say that very well, but hopefully you understand what I mean. Let me just, I've got to finish in just a moment. So let me just talk about different kinds of gatherings for a moment. I'm just going to show you this picture just quickly. We often have large gatherings in church, and this picture, again, brilliantly provided by Dave Lodge. Perhaps if you'd like to put just a message or two to Dave Lodge saying how wonderful he is, I'm sure he would appreciate that as well. He does a great job. But this is just a typical place where Christians gather, a church building. And the look of it is typical. There's a platform at the front, raised high. There's a lectern or a pulpit on it. They're typically in a more modern building, there will be lights and maybe all sorts of other things as well, drum machines and amplifiers and guitars and everything else, bunch of things. And then there's these rows of seats, and people sit in them. Sometimes they're chairs, sometimes they're pews, but typically they all face in the same direction. They all look to the front. And what happens in that is that people, the members, who are largely the ones sitting in the seats, are taken through an experience led by people who lead the events. But they are primarily, and again, I don't want to be overstate this case because it could be misunderstood, but primarily they are observers. And they are not responsible for making this happen. They are expected to come and participate by enjoying or joining in with what actually takes place. So the large gathering, that's what often happens. And churches primarily focus a great deal on providing a space for a large gathering to happen. And then you have small gatherings. Now, if many churches have Sunday school groups for all ages in certain parts of the world, they have small groups where people come together. But often a small group is just like a large group. There are just less people in it. So keeping that image there, which Dave has put up, it may not be quite looks so churchy, but often in a room, the same thing. You see people sitting in rows, and there's a person at the front who's teaching them, telling them things. Or maybe they even sit in a circle and someone teaches them. But largely, the whole space that we've created is a space for people to come and listen to information being passed on. But if we're thinking about providing spaces for a missional community, what would that look like? My guess is that we would probably be looking at a different way. For example, we might be saying, how do we use spaces outside of a building? How could we provide, for example, here's a couple of examples that I know of. What about, why don't we rent some space in the high street? Rent some kind of building in a busy area of the city, where we can actually get Christians together to build bridges with the community where they are, to make friends of other people in other shops or people who come shopping, whatever. And then actually, as they're doing that, they're in the context of learning about how to be disciple makers, because the space they're in is building bridges and connections with the people around them. What about that? I've got a friend in America who the church that he pastors, they have a thing called pop-up church, and they have a trailer with seats in it, and they pop up in different parts of the city. He has spent years building relationships with coffee bars and restaurants and cafes and all kinds of people, and they just turn up and set up, and people see it. It's all happening, and they're there. And they do it in the outdoors where the people are. They don't expect people to come into a place to do it. And I could go on, and I probably will go on a little bit more in the book. But the point I want to make is that we can create spaces. We can use spaces that exist already as well. But if we think about being missional and how do people learn, and we've covered this in previous chapters, the reality is people are going to learn far more about being on mission with Jesus if they do it in a space which is connected with the world outside, rather than just creating spaces that are detached from, separate from the world. Now, of course, the final thing I'll say, then I'll be done. We can also use the spaces we have, what we call our church buildings, in ways that can connect. But that probably means for a lot of our churches, we have to rethink what they look like and how they're designed, and what we're going to do with them, because they are so much focused on being spaces for church members to come. So as I said, I haven't quite finished this chapter yet, but I hope that outline provides you with some kind of thought of where I'll be going. I would appreciate your comments, because I don't feel I've landed it yet. But I really feel that this whole thing of, if we're a missional community, we have to provide spaces and opportunities when we meet for people to be connecting with the mission field, rather than creating spaces that are disconnected from the mission field, which inevitably leads to the focus being on the church and the members, as opposed to the church focusing on the mission field that Jesus wants us to go into. Hope that all made sense. That was chapter 10. Any thoughts you have, please put them down. And I'm not sure about next week, whether I'll be able to do it, because I'm actually traveling from New York to Phoenix next Friday. And I think it will be at the time of this call. So I'll chat with Dave and we'll be in touch with you and let you know what's happening. But thanks for taking part. Really appreciate it. And yeah, see you again soon. God bless you. Thanks.